Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing. They wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climate Consulting. Today is episode 90. We are edging ever closer to that magic 100, and it's a fantastic milestone to hit. I can't believe we are here. When I launched the series, I had no idea that I would be here recording episode 90, and everything and everyone that I've interviewed, everything that's gone on since then. It is really amazing to look back, and that is partly what I want to do today, because today I want to try something new, something a little different, and something that I hope you're going to really enjoy. Many of these clues from guests on this show, whether they were solo consultants, partners in big firms, or consulting entrepreneurs. In the early days of Create Engage, it was the advice and inspiration I took from my guests that really helped me when we were going through tough times. And having spoken with many listeners, I know that you really value these stories too. So today, I have taken a break from my usual interview format, taken a little bit of a different tack, and created a themed episode all about how to start your own consultancy. In today's episode, I bring together valuable insights from a range of previous podcast guests so that all of their insights are in one place for you if you are looking to launch your own consultancy or build your own consulting practice in a larger firm. In this episode, you'll hear from Dom Morehouse of Morehouse, Suki Thompson of Oyster Catchers, Simon Dennis of Gate One, Hannah Farrer of Carnell Farrer, Stephen Newton of Elixir, and Ollie Pennell and Sharon Rice-Oxley of Q5, all sharing their early stories of how they launched their businesses. Listening back to these conversations reminded me of just how valuable I've found all of their advice as the team and I have built Create Engage, and I'm sure that you will find it hugely valuable too. Whether you are looking to strike out on your own or you are looking to build a practice in an established firm, but want to use those same startup fundamental principles, I know this episode is going to give you a huge amount of advice that you can put to good use. So, with all of the intro said and done, please enjoy today's entrepreneur-inspired episode of Climbing Consulting. One thing I think, especially as if you're joining a firm, say it's reasonably established, providing people do things right, they seem to self-perpetuate. Something I think people get a lot less sight of is the early days of firms. Unless there are people who are working like your colleagues when you first started would have. Be really interested to understand the steps you actually took to set up Morehouse, and almost the early year or years, how you went from Dom Morehouse to a team of, I don't know, let's say 5 or 10.
No, sure. So the initial step would have been opening the drawer out, looking at this life plan, and again, sort of thinking, I've really got to do this, or stop talking about it. And you'd be in a place in your life where you go into dinner parties saying, one day I'm going to set up my own company. And I remember, having the thought of, if I don't do this in the next 6 months, then I have got to stop, boring friends with the sort of talk of it. So triggered by the conscious being pricked by reading it again, I took a week off of work from the large company I've discussed, and I literally just locked myself in my small office at the time. It was right up in the roof of my house, and I penned a business plan. And that's a really interesting exercise in itself. And I've talked about this when I run an annual event now for sort of entrepreneurs in a similar place, and I often find myself describing this story, but in the fashion that we've just talked about, in a very structured way, went through the different aspects of it. And I built out a plan of what this business would look like over 5 years. I also set myself very deliberately the goal of getting it to a point of value. So I had an option on that value within 5 years. And we can talk about that a bit more in a moment as to why. But so there was this very structured artifact that kind of came to bear. And you go through some interesting sort of emotional places doing that. And I'll tell you where I went through, because I'm sure your listeners may be in a similar place, which at points where you have crashing doubt, moments of self-confidence doubt. And I found myself describing a firm in whatever it was, 5 years' time, that say had 25, 30 people working into it. And I was like, who am I kidding? I don't even have my first client. I wouldn't even know the first person to bring on. And yeah, I'm painting this rich picture of this end point. And you almost feel like you're almost like a little schoolboy that's kind of, just naively painting something out. And, it doesn't have any kind of credibility to it. I cannot tell you, though, how magically potent that artifact was and became. We can sort of, again, we can.
Well, please, yeah. Why was it?
Well, for a number of reasons. Well, first and foremost, because it absolutely crystallized my intent. And, literally come the Friday of that week, and on the Friday afternoon, I had then, set a bank account up and commissioned an accountant and done all that sort of, boring, sort of legal incorporation aspect. It gave me the confidence over that weekend to step back in on Monday and say, with absolutely 100% conviction, thanks for a great few years at Deloitte, but my journey is heading off elsewhere. So first and foremost, it did that, and I guess it cemented in me that I have a baseline now. I can sort of at least march on this. Of course, you meet the real world. There's a huge amount of sort of variables then that you're up against. But I tell you the other real powerful, or many powerful bits about this, which is, well, first and foremost, when you do get the opportunity to grow, and I very fortunately had a first engagement that enabled me to bring in a small team. And we put a team of 4 of us initially. It grew quite quickly into Transport for London, actually, was a first key client. And at this point, you can imagine the conversation where I'm, speaking to people to say, would you come and join me? Like, who are you? You're a one-man band, and, what am I joining? And actually being able to say, well, read my business plan and see the kind of considered thought I've given to the kind of firm and I want to build, the kind of values it carries, the kind of place I want to be in 3, 4, 5 years' time, and the kind of work we're going to do. It was a massively powerful recruitment asset, for nothing else, because I think, genuinely helped, particularly in the early stages, me assuage people that, I wasn't just making it up as I was going along.
So you would give this to prospective hires. You'd say, check out my business plan.
Absolutely. And again, this is a little bit idiosyncratic of me, I think, but a key principle for me was everybody should see that plan in my firm. So when the firm grew and we evolved into annual planning cycles where the whole firm would be involved in updating and refining the plan, it was really important to me that everybody saw that, right down to the nitty gritty of the P&L and the financial KPIs, etc.
And I do want to come on to that, and I think there's going to be, to your point around who has the most stories wins, I think there's going to be a great story around TfL and how you got your 4 people. I wanted just to hold on the planning element for a moment, mainly for my listeners. Again, if they are like you, sitting there as a manager in any consulting firm, they take this week off. What are the key things that they should capture in the plan? What were the sections that really lived on past that sort of first week for you versus the ones that fell away?
Conversely, in some ways, that structure largely survived. What I did, you're going to test my memory because what I did at the time actually is I was reading pretty avariciously around business planning, and I think there's loads of books out there. There's one actually I do remember that I thought was really useful, and I'll probably forget the author's name now, but you can check this and put it maybe in the notes. But Richard Stutley kind of comes to mind. But the book was called something like the Definitive Business Plan. Yeah, so if that's still in print, I remember that was a very well articulated reference point. It's fairly sort of grounded stuff, this, isn't it? So absolutely assess the market. What did I see the market doing in terms of the sort of growth for the area that I was positioning my firm into? How was that market fragmented? What were the factors that were driving that growth? Looking at the competition, there's always a bit of analysis as to just how competitive the landscape is, and genuinely, without sort of whimsical thinking, how do you think you will fare when you land in that supply side? So, that's the kind of environmental analysis, I guess, up front. A whole load of, what is the proposition that I seek to land? How does that decompose into sort of sub-service areas? A whole load of planning around the organizational build. And a great book, actually, I would highly recommend. I don't think it's ever really been surpassed, is David Maister's Managing the Professional Service Firm, particularly around how successful professional service firms develop leverage. And again, a hugely misunderstood or not known concept. But you've got to understand the sort of organizational and economic leverage you're building in a firm. And if you get an understanding of that from day one, which I did, I was doing this when I hadn't even started, I worked that leverage concept through into how I saw the organization growing, both in terms of human beings, but in terms of, financial metrics. So there's a whole load of analysis on that front. The other huge advantage you have is you can start to paint the kind of company you want, what sort of values it carries, what's the end vision, what are the key objectives you're seeking to achieve, you hold yourself true to. And then, of course, there's a whole load of financial analysis that you've ultimately got some Excel spreadsheet on the side crunching away. And I guess, the sort of typical final section of such a piece is the risks and how you see yourself mitigating those going forward.
And what sort of, I think that bit's quite interesting, actually, the risks. Maybe if we fast forward it to now, like you mentioned, you run retreats for entrepreneurs who were like you back then. You have a number of guides on the topic. What are the sort of risks that people need to be really mindful of if they're setting out on this sort of journey?
It's true. Big question in that, it's entrepreneuring. Yeah. Entrepreneuring by definition is, you're taking huge risk. And I guess if I framed it though and put it into context, so I would have been 34, 35 at the time. Probably 2 of my 3 children had come along by then, got a mortgage to pay, mouse to feed. Fundamentally, security of future income stream here is where you are. And, I guess where I was, I didn't have huge savings. I think what I had done in my mind was position those savings to say, well, that gives me a runway, and it gives me a runway of X months. If after those X months, my entrepreneurial venture just hasn't come to anything, what does that mean? Well, it probably means I need to kind of put my hands up in the air, say, this probably wasn't for me, and, I head back into the world of employment. But this is a really key point, Nick, I think. And, what's really lost at that point? I guess this is where I landed, which is nothing is lost at that point. In fact, as an employer now down the line, I would employ somebody every day who had shown the spark to go off and do that, even if it hadn't actually worked out. I think it talks volumes to the kind of self-drive and proactivity of that individual. So for me, I kind of thought, if it doesn't work out, ultimately, I'll burn through my savings and I'll go back into the world of employment. But, I was pretty confident I'd find another job. I might take a few steps backwards, but, in the grand schema, that for me was my frame on initial risk.
How did oyster catchers start?
So my previous company, Haystack, was what you would call an intermediary. So sits between clients and agencies and helps clients find agencies. So I was nicknamed Suki Matchmaker for a long time. And it was that lovely kind of role, which was, again, sort of 15 years ago, was quite unusual in the marketplace. There were 2 or 3 big intermediary companies that were predominantly run actually by men, middle-aged men, that helped clients find agencies. And when I set up Haystack, I kind of looked at it from a much more consultative approach. So working with marketing teams to use finding a new agency as part of a transformation. In between Haystack and oyster catchers, I just was a consultant for a year on my own. So I was at home most of the time. I had a couple of people working for me. My children were quite young. I wanted to make sure that they were okay after my divorce. And it was, it was fine. It was interesting. I had some nice clients, but I didn't really like working on my own. And I wanted to start another business. And I'd looked around at doing other things. As you said, I'd had a gin company before. I'd always wanted to run a sailing school. So I did that debate of, do I go back to Cornwall and run a sailing school? And actually, for me, I love marketing. I love our industry. I think it's extraordinary. And, at that time, 10 years ago, was absolutely the time of the dot-com bubble and everything was growing. It was absolutely becoming around digital. And so I thought, well, I'll start a business again. And I was at a dinner party. And at this dinner party was Peter. And I was sitting next to him and chatting. And I had previously, I'd been part of the Marketing Society. I'd been on the board of the Marketing Society, and I'd run one part of the events piece, and I'd handed it over to Peter as I went onto the board. So I knew him from there. He was an amazing new business director at WPP. And so when I'd been running pitches for people like British Airways and Sainsbury's, he had been the new business director on the other side. And we knew lots of people, and we'd been in the industry a long time. And I'd talked to him when I was at Haystack, actually, about whether he ever wanted to come and work with us, but it never came to anything. So at this dinner party, we got chatting, and he was going to do something in this space. And I went, well, come and work with me. And it went from there. So, he's massively enthusiastic about everything. They used to call him Top Banana at WPP. And, I was quite clear, and I just said, look, I absolutely know what the business should look like. I think we should be engaging in digital space. I think it should be a business that's more around helping marketing departments function and be amazing, and how we work with their clients and agencies. So I sort of know what to do. And I think we should build a consultancy, not just an intermediary. But I think you'll be brilliant at having a different perspective on how we run pitches, and you can learn and help grow it that way. So I sort of knew where the business might go and how to do it. And Peter brought his, loads and loads of years of experience of the whole industry, in creating a kind of even more encompassing pitch process. And I just think we just found out that we just liked each other. We got on really well. We are really, really different. I mean, he is slightly eccentric. There's a lovely expression that one of our clients, Kat at TK Maxx, talks about is, get the fish out on the table.
Okay.
And getting the fish out on the table means say all the stuff in the room, like the elephant in the room. Say all the stuff that other people are thinking and don't say. Peter always says the stuff that other people don't say.
He always brings the fish.
He always brings the fish. And, he loves people. So his idea of success is every client hugs him and says, you're amazing. He has ability to hug people, to kiss people far too much for my liking, and men and women. And, that's slightly off-putting, but that's what Peter's like. So, when we first got together to working together and we were chatting, and I said, we were looking at the clients we might work with. And I said, well, I know Nigel Gilbert at that time, the CMO of Lloyds Banking Group. And he went, oh, I know Nigel. I said, oh, that's good. So we phoned Nigel and went to see him, and Nigel gave us one of our first projects. So Peter drives a massive motorbike, And I said, Nigel's just said we've got our first project. It's amazing. He goes, excellent. I'm going to get on my bike and go and see him. So he literally jumps on his motorbike. He goes across town. He walks into Lloyd's Bank. He walks into Nigel's office, gives him a massive hug and kiss, literally a hug and kiss, and then walks back to the office and goes, darling, I love you, and comes back. I'm going, Peter, that's just outrageous. How are you doing that? And how do you get away with it? But you know what? 10 years later, that's still what he does with all clients. And even the clients that at the beginning kind of go, well, I'm not sure about Peter. He's quite full on. By the end, love him because he passionately loves their business and loves people and working with them. And he's amazingly good at it. So it's been great.
And I'm really interested in that start point. Finding a business partner can be a challenge. Many businesses fall apart because partnerships don't work. How did you decide, and how did Peter decide that you were a good partnership? Do you remember any of the conversations you had, any of the thought processes you went through to decide that? Because I think for others who are looking to start a business, I think that's a really interesting point, especially given what you say about how different you are.
Do you know what? I think we're really lucky. I don't think we did any of the properly, oh my God, what happens if it doesn't work, if we don't get on? I just think we just thought, look, we kind of like each other. It might work, it might not. And actually, I then brought in Angus Crowther as my third managing partner. A little bit later, we had Richard Robinson, and the four of us were the managing partners when we sold the business. So I think we were really, really lucky. We had then a couple of other managing partners we tried to bring in along the journey and they didn't work out. So I think the thing is, when it doesn't work, I think we've always been too slow to get rid of them. Actually, in every single instance, we've been too slow to get rid of them.
Why?
Because they don't fit. And it's not their fault. It's not they're not good. They just don't culturally fit. And I think as you grow bigger, there's a tipping point, isn't there? As you grow, employing the next senior person is disproportionately important. And therefore, if it doesn't work, it makes a massive impact on the whole business. As you then get to a critical size, sort of doesn't matter quite so much. I mean, it does obviously at that very senior managing partner level, but you can bring people in and they don't all necessarily fit, and you can accommodate that. But it's much more difficult, I think, as you build a business.
What stopped you? You said you got rid of them too late. What stopped you getting rid of them with hindsight? What was the right time?
Because they were always nice people. They were nice. They weren't trying to be hopeless or trying to not work with us well. And sometimes it was us. Sometimes they came in at a time when we were trying to grow and do something different. We're kind of the sort of slightly classic entrepreneur where we do stuff a bit too much by gut and instinct rather than having lots of processes. We've never been massively process driven. And therefore we've been quite agile and customer focused. That's quite frustrating, I think, for other people to come and join. But, I've seen that in lots of businesses, much bigger businesses than we've had. It's a kind of slightly entrepreneurial trait, isn't it? You just go and get stuff done and then worry about it later rather than putting it as much systems and processes as you should, probably.
And was it that gut feeling that led to you actually creating the consultancy business? Because, like you said, you ran the agency matchmaking business. And it seems to me that actually that marketing consultative approach was quite new when you were setting it up. Is it just you felt it was right, or how did you decide that was the right business to go after?
There's a couple of things. One has been I actually wanted to passionately bring in training. Training and capability was the thing that I really wanted to bring alongside pitch and partnership stuff. So I think training is really important to all businesses. I think it's really important to people and individuals. And I think as an industry, we have often shied away from training our people brilliantly. So, if you are a lawyer or a financial person, you sit in a kind of formulaic process that just because you've come out of university or whatever, you carry on learning, you carry on doing professional study and sitting exams. We don't do that in marketing. I mean, you could leave school and never do marketing anything at any time and still be really successful. And I'm not sure that that's always a good thing. I don't think it's always a good thing for our profession. So I was really interested in training. So there was that. And then as you look at clients and agencies and how they can perform together, and then you look at how do you optimize that relationship and you put in training, there's another piece that says, but how does the model work? So how do we make the whole thing fit together? And therefore, the consultancy piece became intrinsically more important. And we were looking at increasing as how do you evolve ways of working. The other thing is our clients. So I talked a little bit about McDonald's. McDonald's has been a core client of ours for a long time. Sainsbury's has as well. BT. There's a number of key clients and individuals that have said to us, we need some help. So could you help us in evolving this? So, the reason we put together our training and it really accelerated was McDonald's wanted some training, so we evolved it and created it. And then Sainsbury's said that we've got an opportunity to build an academy for them. So they enabled us to pitch for that, and we got it right. And we said, look, you're our first client to do this with. And they went, that's okay. We'll trust you. We've worked with you for some time. We trust you to evolve and we'll grow it together. So I think clients have enabled us to do that. But then I think in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, as we have been growing oyster catchers, the market has changed so fundamentally. And as the big consultancies have become more focused on the understanding and helping businesses change as much as they've needed to, it's been more important that marketing has worked more effectively. And the complexity around how do you really get marketing to change, I think has meant there's been an opportunity for us to be able to create a consultancy that fits.
I guess I did the classic consulting career journey if you don't become a big firm partner. I did the other route, which is going progressively smaller. So I did 5 years at a global consultancy. So I was at Deloitte for that time. Had a range of great experiences there, multi-sector, some very, very diverse projects, programs I worked on there. Worked on the Oyster launch and did a stint working for the managing partner, which was really insightful. So good times there. I then, just at the point when it was time to go out into industry and do something different, had the opportunity to follow a colleague of mine, Dom Morehouse, who I know is another guest of yours from this series, who'd recently started up Morehouse Consulting. So found that proposition too intriguing to decline. So followed Dom a little while after he'd started, ended up staying there for 7 years and taking that organization on, really interesting growth journey, and really sort of honed my craft as a consultant during that period, and understood what it took to go on that journey, build a business, and I got pretty close to the inner workings of the whole enterprise by the time I left. And then doing my own thing, so with myself and my co-founders, we started the business. Yeah, as I say, going on for 5 years ago. Mostly, it's been a really positive story. So, yeah, been a consultant for going on for 18 years now. Still looking to be doing a proper job that I always thought I'd be doing. But so it's been an interesting journey.
Obviously, Dom has been a previous guest on the podcast, as my listeners will know. He built Morehouse, sold Morehouse. I think you were there for a little bit longer afterwards. What was it that led you and your co-founders to set up Gate One? You're obviously quite senior at Morehouse. What was it that made you decide to go out on your own at that time?
Good question. And it was definitely a real fork in the road moment. So a lot of it was definitely some unfinished business from Morehouse days. So there was something of a push factor in terms of the new era post Dom and other founding directors stepping away, new leadership team, new ideas, different set of values as well, I'd say, and sort of directionally the business quite quickly going to new places that weren't necessarily in keeping with where we might have taken the organization. So that was a big part of it. The kind of strategy was clearly shifting and moving back towards what we perceived to be more building a mini big firm, classic sort of leverage model, pyramid structure, a different direction, moving into a different space, and away from the really high value end, top end, complex, senior, difficult change. So I don't want to overplay that too, because the much bigger part of it was clearly the pull factor of ourselves and our own motivations and our own ideas for what we would do if we were to start our own consultancy. So the genesis of the idea might have been born out of, some of those quite difficult times actually, but we were really clear that if we did decide to go down this path and start again, that we were going to do that from a basis of investing positive energy. And over the course of the 7 years I was at Morehouse, that was very predominantly a hugely positive experience, and we learned a huge amount that we felt we could reinvest, but also do our own way and not do the journey better, but definitely do it differently.
Yeah. Do you remember how those conversations first started? Because there's obviously yourself and your other 3 co-founders, so 4 of you. Were you just all in the pub one day and said, why don't we give this a go? Did one of you tap another on the shoulder? Who tapped another on the shoulder? Do you remember how that sort of first came about?
It's really hard to probably pinpoint a precise moment. Inevitably the kind of germs of these ideas start long before, and we all left it at slightly different times and for slightly different reasons.
Oh, so you'd actually left at this point. You'd gone and, I don't know, were you contracting in between or sort of doing another project role in between?
Yeah, there was a bit of a bridging period. So we all decided different things. But personally, I spent a period of a few months doing some independent work whilst, in the period after we'd all left. Then there was some background work to try and get the business off the ground, and a lot of the sort of formative thinking about, like you said, why are we doing this? What are we going to stand for? What's really important to us? And, early thinking into the brand and those kind of things, and really were happening long before the business was trading. Yeah. So there was definitely quite a long genesis or, embryonic state of the business before, before we formally incorporated and were sort of trading and working under the new brand.
Yeah. And do you remember what those elements were that, like you said, you wanted to do it sort of not better, but differently? You wanted to put your own mark on it. What were those core elements that you and your co-founders were talking about then, and how have those influenced the firm as you've grown it?
Massively, and I think that goes right to the heart of, I really look back on that period and figuratively feel like we took the blue pill over the red pill, in that moment, and having taken that very deliberate decision and been so close not to taking that decision, we absolutely wanted to have this no regrets mentality with everything that we did. Yeah. And you only can truly embody that ethos if every single day, you're maintaining those standards of excellence, you're taking on the problems that people tell you are impossible, you're holding each other to account in terms of your professional standards, but your behaviors and ultimately there's, we've tried to retain this innate sense of journey in what we're doing. So yes, we wanted to be disruptive, and yes, we wanted to do things a bit differently, as much for our own motivation in that moment as because we thought there was a market need. I mean, Nobody would tell you there's a market need for doing the incubator, for example, but that was something we really wanted to do for us, as one example of what we've done differently. But really, in terms of kind of the core essence of the business, which is what you're asking about, it was really about this enshrining a sense of limitless possibility in anything that we do, be that with the client work that we take on, the people that we bring in, the businesses that we're going to spawn. We really wanted to have that no regrets mentality with all of it. And that has to come, you have to live and breathe that every day, I guess. Yeah. You can't just say that. And, and similarly, anyone who comes on this journey with us for however long they stay, we really want them to share that same sense of journey and be the best they can be, meaning giving of themselves, to the maximum every day. And put simply, the more you put in, the more you get out. And that's what we try to do all of the time.
I'm interested because I think it potentially applies not just to people starting their own firm, but even just making career moves. You mentioned that it almost it so nearly didn't happen. Do you remember the decision point or the decision process that led to you deciding to do it, or led to you and your co-founders deciding to go for it?
So it was, I think, a large part of why we decided to go for it was the collective endeavor. So all of us have been consultants for a long time. God knows, in my case, it was time to do something a bit more, a bit more grown up. Probably at that at that point, or maybe one day in the future. Any one of us could have given ourselves hundreds of reasons why not to do it. Starting again, having done a very significant long journey in Morehouse days, was going to require huge amounts of grit, energy, resilience. We knew what we were getting ourselves in for. So you don't do that lightly. But had it been left to any single one of us, I highly doubt that we would have started our own consultancy organization. Or speaking for myself, I definitely wouldn't. And even though we all had very young families at the time, and you can kind of hear that voice in the back of your head screaming, this is crazy, time to move onwards and upwards, not, as some would say, go back to the beginning. So it was really that commitment to each other. We were all in that stage at more or less the same time. We had similar reference points of what great looked like, similar reference points of how quickly those things can unravel. We'd been through the bumps in the road of building a business. We felt we were really well placed to anticipate those and be successful. And we genuinely saw gaps in the market that were different too. So it was really, if I boil the answer to your question down to one thing, it was really that collective endeavor. And as soon as you're in something with others, as with anything, personal training or anything where you co-invest someone else into your goals, you multiply the chances of success. So I think that's probably my answer, but what took much more resolve was sticking with it, actually. So
how so?
Well, I think for all the reasons that we backed ourselves to be successful, and the points of our career we were at, and our networks, and all of those aspects which are really important. It was still tremendously hard to get off go, and the number of near misses we had, the number of rejections we had, for all our sort of personal capital in consultancy that we delivered to a huge number of senior people that we backed ourselves to give us more work, it still takes something extra to get a client or a prospective staff member or associate to come on board something that has literally no track record as an entity.
Yeah.
And we'd had so many close calls that we felt were real bankers, and inevitably it tests your resolve. And so there's definitely a moment I vividly remember a few months into post that decision to really go for this, when we were kind of sat in a pub, fairly gloomy faced to be fair, and honestly looking at each other and going, great that we've tried this, but is this going to work? And were we unrealistic in our expectations? And I think at that moment we gave ourselves, one final push to really make it happen as a kind of final make or break. And fortuitously or not fortuitously, that was really when things started to happen. And once we got our first break and our first, meaningful sale, momentum built really quickly.
And I think that point about perseverance is a key point. And like you say, you could have given up before you even started. You couldn't have given up in that pub and all gone off and done different things. And actually that perseverance obviously paid off. And we're sitting here sort of 5 years later talking about the awards you won. So it presumably is paying off, which is great, really great to hear. I'm interested, especially starting a new consulting firm. Consulting is a very competitive industry. There's a lot of good quality firms out there. You mentioned, you had seen some gaps in the market. What were those gaps that you were targeting to make Gate 1 different? I mean, that could be market service gaps at client side, might be you saw a different model for doing something internally. What were those key gaps that you saw for Gate 1?
I think you touched on some of the fundamental points, because I'd be lying if I said we, Gate 1, have this, unique service line totally nailed that no one's ever discovered. That's simply not the case. And with some companies it genuinely is, but we think our industry is still fundamentally underserved. The clients who purchase consultancy are still fundamentally underserved. There's some phenomenal work that happens in all sorts of sectors, but the level of trust, skill, satisfaction is way short of what it could be, given the expertise and kudos of practitioners in our space. So really we felt, and having seen what was successful previously, bringing the way we consulted with our clients was the real gap, in a way that was consciously different from particularly the big four, an easy target, right? But all having had personal experience of those kind of environments and seeing the agenda of one's clients inevitably coming into conflict with the agenda of those big firms, and in such a way that any pretense of being an independent advisor is impossible. That's the starting point for what clients really need and really value, especially as capability for changing and transforming organizations is building all of the time, in every business, everywhere, right? So not only do we have to raise our game continually, but what's really valuable is where clients can come in and be that catalytic effect, working in, we call it the ripple effect, is kind of our internal language for that. But small teams making a concerted difference in such a way that the ripples of what they're doing is felt much broadly across the organization. It's never about us, but it is about the change that we start, and the snowballs that we start, rolling. And that kind of concept embodies a lot of things, but the energy, the passion, the cultural sensitivity with which we work, and just fundamentally it's that personal touch and emotional intelligence. So if you add in one package, which we seek to do with each person who works in our business, never mind collectively, really high skill levels as a consultant, deep expertise in whatever the project or sector context is, and just phenomenal EQ and empathy, who understands the full life cycle of transformation, and then you get those people working together in teams, that's fundamentally the proposition. And if you're true to where that bar is with everybody you try to bring into your team, and the character fit and the cultural fit and the values fit with those individuals, that's, I think, what the ultimate USP is of what we're trying to do. And of course, we need to have a very specific viewpoint on what's happening in lots of different spaces, and we need to be very on trend with enhancing and utilizing different technologies and those kind of things. However, the fundamental USP for us always has been and always will be that the package that you get in every individual who's part of the team, and that's what's most powerful, and that's the feedback that we get from our clients repeatedly.
It'd be great to actually find out, for those who maybe don't know you so well or haven't come across CF before, actually, what was the origin story? How did you get started, and what was it that led you to launch the business?
The origin story, it's not really, it doesn't stem from any kind of master plan. If you'd asked me 10 years ago what I was going to do, I was going to work in the public sector. I was going to work in health, for health, and that's what I thoroughly expected my career to be and to look like. And with the 2010 government, they did a massive reform of the NHS. And I worked at the time for an organisation called NHS London, which was the strategic health authority for the NHS in London. And I loved my job and was passionate, committed, thoroughly proud of what I did. And that organisation in this set of reforms got abolished. And I had to think about what I was going to do. And I was relatively young for the position that I'd found myself at that point in my career. And the job landscape was very challenging in the NHS at my level of seniority. There was a big contraction, and other people had more experience than I did with tenure, so to speak. And I also had some real constraints on my life with young children and willingness to relocate. At that time, I was a single mother with 2 boys. So the thought process was a bit like, well, what am I going to do? And through the organisation I worked with got abolished in 2013. So it was quite a drawn out ending to my career in the NHS.
So did you know, how long did you know that you were going to be made redundant from that role? Was it that 3 years or?
No, it was a couple of years that I knew that I was going to get made redundant. I guess I still thought I was going to have something else. So even though the something else wasn't defined, I just expected that the right job would come around for me within the NHS system. And so I would say probably only in the final 6 months did it really begin to crystallize for me that wasn't necessarily going to be the case, and I had to think about other options. And that's where founding CF came into it. So other management consultancy companies were interested in hiring me, and that caused a kind of chain of thinking about, well, did I really want to do that, or would I actually like to set up my own one? And Ruth had been clear for some time that this decision around this set of reforms was therefore the point at which it was the right decision to move on. And if I'm honest, I was drunk one night in a bar with her, and we decided we were going to take this leap of faith, which for me felt like it was a big risk, being used to working in the public sector, to saying I'm going to create a startup with 2 young kids, hence the need for alcohol. But nonetheless, that is what I did.
That is, I'm running my own business now, and I've had a number of guests who have founded their own businesses like yourselves. I'm always fascinated on what makes people make that move, because I know so many people and speak to so many people who choose not to, or decide they, for whatever reason, they can't. So I really want to dive into that. But just beforehand, because again, I appreciate you mentioned Ruth there, who you co-founded the business with. How did you two know each other? Had you worked together at NHS London? Was it friends? How did that conversation even start for you to say yes in the pub that night?
So she was the chief executive of NHS London, and I was on the board as one of the director team working for her. But I've worked with her off and on since, I think it was about 2003 that I first met her. So we worked together in the Department of Health, off and on in different roles, and then must have been about 7 years. Might be getting my years quite a little bit wrong, but anyway, we worked together. I worked for her, so that's how I know her, and we make a good team. I like working with her. She likes working with me. So.
And you mentioned you'd spent your career up until that point in the public sector. Am I right? Ruth was a similar background. Had she been in consulting before, or was she public sector sort of for her whole career as well?
The NHS likes to have reforms. So she had a temporary period out of it. I think the reforms we're talking about, maybe it's either number 8, 9, 10 in her career, something like that. So she had worked for a small period of time as a consultant, but a freelance consultant, as opposed to what we embarked on doing in setting up CF. But otherwise, public sector through and through, over 30 years. So long-standing career in the NHS.
Wow. And so the reason I ask is because I'm really keen to find out about the early days of CF, because I think, and I'm sure I'll be offending someone here, so I apologize to whoever that is, but if I think about a lot of my guests, they have all, who have started their own firms, it's worth saying, they have come from a consulting background. So they have been in a big four or a boutique firm, and at some point they've decided they'd go out on their own. So they come with an understanding of what it's like to be a consultant, and B, almost a blueprint for how to do that. It sounds like, while I'm sure you'd worked with consultants and had a decent idea of what they did as a client, you didn't have either of those. And I guess I'm really interested almost how in those early days, almost what you asked yourselves in the pub to say, yes, let's do it. And then how did you build those skills so quickly to make the business a success? Because like you said, if you're a single mother, you've got 2 kids, you don't have, well, I don't know, but you don't have the luxury of, years to figure this out. You've got to make a successful business. And I'm sure that was, weighing heavily on your mind. So what were those key questions you two asked each other? And then what were those early steps you took to really set the business up for success?
Well, partly, it goes back to why not work for one of these other bigger companies as opposed to setting something on our own. And if I'm honest, I couldn't get excited about it. And partly I couldn't get excited about it because of the way they're structured, because of the constraints on the offer. Ruth was used to being a chief executive. I was used to being a board member. And within that, there was a lot of autonomy to operate with, even within the public sector, in terms of decision making and choices. And so even at very senior levels in some of the bigger companies, I don't think it's very hard to influence. And I think that what I believed in and what we've tried to do is something that's different, that's differentiating, and it is bringing our kind of value space to what we've tried to do, but also recognizing the skills and capabilities that we have brought to our clients because of the depth of experience we have in the sector. And I did the strategy role at NHS London, so a lot of what I would call core consulting skill set were needed to be effective in that role. And I was a client to a number of different consulting companies. Now, for sure, I didn't really know what I was letting myself into in completeness, but I did have sufficient confidence to say, well, I don't want to do that. And I do think we could offer something different and distinctive that the market needs. So it was a little bit like a leap of faith and a judgment as much about what I didn't want to do as what I did.
And I think that it's a really powerful point you make, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily take that stock and say, what is it I want to do? And almost, what don't I? So, take that decision point you did. Once you'd made that jump, you two had committed to this, you'd got to work, you decided on the name, the proposition almost. What were those first, and if this is too far back, stop me, what were those first 3, 6, 12 months like? What were the things that when you started, almost you went in either thinking they'd be really easy and they were really difficult, or almost the other way around? What were those things that really stuck with you that you remember from setting up in the early days?
I learned that it was really difficult to open a bank account. like stuck in the dark age type difficult. You physically had to turn up oneself. And we got a credit limit for about 500 quid, which, doesn't get you that many train fares, does it? So some of the small stuff, we were joking, but I vividly remember what a pain I thought it was trying to open bank accounts and credit cards and things that you take for granted, even in one's personal life, and you for sure take for granted in a professional context. Those things were remarkably difficult, and I think you don't expect them at all. You don't anticipate that's going to happen. But we were relatively quick at using the relationships that we have and the credibility we had to win work and to provide the kind of support that we wanted to for people. So that obviously was a key focus in our first 3 to 6 months doing that. But because of the relationships we held, because we had this very deep understanding of the market, given where we'd come from, I think we were more successful more quickly on that front than I ever expected. And the things that we found much harder were some of the basics about putting a business together, which I had no experience of to kind of draw on.
What were those basics? Because I've heard a lot of people talk about the challenges of selling, which obviously it sounds like because of your network and your reputations wasn't your challenge. So what were those basics? Obviously the bank account and the little things, but I imagine there were some more structural pieces as well. So what were some of those basics that you really had to work hard to put in place in those early days?
So I wouldn't say it was by the way, I don't want it to make it sound like it's easy to do selling, because it totally isn't.
So I only say that because I have talked to a number of guests about it over the last few shows. So it was not that it's exactly like, not that it's easy, but sorry, I cut you off. The first 3 were easy. What happened after that?
So I was just saying selling wasn't easy, but I think some of the things that were most tricky, I don't know that I could say they were definitely things that happened in the first 3 to 6 months, but obviously as we were growing and we were working out what we wanted to be, we needed to hire people. And while you can convince yourself to take this kind of crazy leap of faith that after a few margaritas, you might convince yourself it's a good idea. Getting other people to think this was a secure job and with the kind of capability and talent that we needed to be a success is actually, I think, very hard in the early days. Now we have an analyst program, we have an annual intake into that. We get the most fabulous talent applying for that program, and more talented people than we can take to come in our kind of September intake. But at the beginning, it's very hard to get people to take a leap of faith just because you have to come and work as part of CF, because there's no track record for them to be confident in. People have their own commitments.
How did you do that? Other than taking them to the pub for margaritas, which might have been the strategy, I don't know. How did you go about getting those first few hires, and like you say, the ones that are almost the hardest to win, but almost the most critical to your long-term success?
Go on a big by putting a lot of time at it. I would still say now we put a lot of time at the people aspects of the business, but personally engaging with people through a process and talking to them about their concerns and taking time over it. And then you do get people who it is the right point in their life. They want to do something different. We're a mission-driven organisation, and I think we attract talent now and did then who have a commitment and feel excited about that mission. And so that's the thing that I think hooked and has hooked people to saying, yes, we want to be part of CF.
I want to come back to the entrepreneurial side, because I think there's going to be a fascinating insight around how you do employ people but cultivate that entrepreneurial mindset, because like you say, it's a spectrum, but there is a potential dichotomy there. I want to turn back to yourself, because my understanding is actually you were in a very similar place when you went out to start one of your startups. Now, for my listeners' benefit, you started 3 businesses, I believe, prior to starting Elixir.
Sure.
What was going through your mind? Because I'm sure there's some listeners who may be in that same position. They're almost a partner. They've almost climbed to the top of the mountain as they see it, but they've got that idea. What was that for you? How was that for you?
It is interesting. I've always wanted to build a business because I see it as it's just something that I've always had the desire to do. And I was always looking for that invention that I could build my business around. I said I wasn't an inventor. So I guess I experimented along the way. But I want to just say something before I explain the 3 businesses I started. I used consulting because for me, the most entrepreneurial thing you can do in corporate life is consulting. Being a partner in a consulting firm is the most entrepreneurial position in corporate life, because you are accountable for your own revenue and your own costs, and you have to show a profit. And it's very real, it's very visceral. It becomes less and less so the bigger the consultancy, because, in a KPMG or an Accenture or a PwC or whatever, the numbers are so diluted. If one partner's not doing so well, it's not really noticed. But in smaller partnerships, you certainly own the issue. If you're not delivering value and you're not being paid, you don't make any money. It's as simple as that, right? And so that is the most entrepreneurial thing. So I've always used consulting as the way to sort of satisfy that itch, if you like, that I wanted to have that accountability. But ultimately, I wanted to build something of substance outside of necessarily consulting. That was my initial ambition. So my first attempt at this was around 2000, and I don't know if you old enough, Nick, to remember, but 2000 was the internet bubble, right?
I believe it was. I believe it was.
Yeah, it's when everyone thought the high street was dead, and there'd be no shops on the high street. Everyone would buy everything.
Sort of like where we are now.
Quite, with Bitcoin and a few other things. Yeah, every currency is about to die, right? The same thing happened in 2000, and we had this huge momentum around internet businesses, a lot of funding. And I thought, I was a senior manager at the time at KPMG in London here. And, like anybody, it's a big decision then at that point in your career. You've invested a lot in building yourself to that point. I thought I was on partner track. It depends who you speak to. So that was my ambition while I was in consulting. And rightly so, it should be ambition. But I thought I'd just have to give this a go. I've always wanted to do this. So I started a company with 6 other guys. I was 30 at the time. My son was 6 months old. I just bought a house in Surrey for 140K, I think. and I raised the mortgage to 240,000 because you could do that back then, even though the equity wasn't in the house. We all put 100,000 in the middle of the table, and
100,000 each.
Yeah, six of us, 100,000 each, and we resigned and went after it for 12 months. And my wife thought I was mad, but I said to her, this is an itch I've got to scratch. I've got to have a go at this. But it is interesting because I encourage anybody to have a go, like you've had a go. But there needs to be a bit of realism in it too. The idea we had wasn't a bad idea, but it wasn't a brilliant one. It's not the reason the business didn't succeed. The business did not succeed and failed, and I lost all my money. I lie. We sold out. I think I got $5,000 back. So for 100,000 down, I got $5,000 back, which is not
better than nothing, I guess.
Well, not one of my best investments.
No,
let's say, but still, it's one of those things that is a massive learning experience, because I learned a lot out of that. I learned, the first thing and probably the most valuable lesson is consensus is no way to run a business. I mean, we all live in a democracy, and we like to feel we all have a voice. But actually in business, someone has to make a call. It's a bit like if you've played sport in teams. You listen to everyone, but as a captain of a team, you've got to call the play. You can't have everybody deciding how to play. Yeah. Someone has to make the call. And the problem we had in that business, if I'm honest, was that we all had equal stakes and we all had one board seat. And therefore, we found the lowest common denominator as opposed to the best answer. The lowest common denominator is satisficing, right? It's just not the best answer. So I vowed never to do that again. So what it cost me, that MBA cost me £100,000, but it was a good lesson. Yeah. I took that forward, and I accept that if I'm in a hierarchy or if I'm setting up a hierarchy, it needs to be this way because someone has to make the call. And it's a great lesson, and I'll take it with me. There's lots of other lessons in there, but that was, I think, the most material one that came out of that for me.
I'm really interested now that you are where you are with Elixir. How do you balance that? Like you say, your view is you always need one person to make the call. How do you balance that with sort of the other end of the spectrum? I feel our conversation will be all about spectrums. One end you've got, like you say, 6 people around the table. Everyone has to be satisfied and you get a lowest common denominator. The other end, some might say you get an autocracy. How do you balance that so that, like you say, you have that definitive view, but others are still able to input and provide that insight so that it doesn't just become that one person's view?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? I mean, I think I use metaphors a lot, right? And I use sporting analogies because I love my sport. But
I think there's a lot we can learn from sport as well, so I agree.
Absolutely, and that's why I encourage everyone to play team sports, because I think I can't win a rugby match on my own, but I do accept that someone has to be the captain on the field. And you get good captains and you get bad captains, right? Good coaches and bad coaches. And the good ones are the ones that listen, the ones that understand, the ones that genuinely try to find the best answer. It really comes down to the leadership at the end of the day. If you're the type of leader that wants to be an autocrat and wants to have the power of making decisions and believes that your decisions are always the best ones, then you'll make a very poor leader in an environment where you're expecting people to present their views and you're trying to find and make genuinely the best decision. I think, unfortunately, the way corporate life is often structured is that it's not structured in such a way that people genuinely get a transparent view of the truth. Hence, they hire consultants. And so what ends up happening is that you get suboptimal decision-making. I think what I've tried to build in Elixir anyway, certainly as the outcome of that lesson, if you like, in this business, is it's a true partnership. We're all partners. We all share in the profit of the firm. We have our partners meetings. We have full and frank conversations, but it's Chatham House rules, right? So anybody can have an opinion in the room, but when we decide, we walk out with one voice. And that means if you disagree, you get your chance to have your say. And if you can't convince, then we walk out with a view that's different to yours and you have that view too. But if you do that fairly and you do that pragmatically and you don't do that with ego and ulterior motive and all the negative emotions that can go with being a dictator, if you like, then I think you get the best out of people, because we've all played sport with good captains and that's what they do, right? They find a way, when they need to, they're tough, but they find a way to get the best decision and make people feel like they're participating in it. And But at the end of the day, when the chips are down, someone has to say, right, we're going that way, you know, and that's just the truth of the matter. So it's almost like a benign dictatorship, right?
Yeah, and I mean, as a rugby and sports fan as well, you know, you can see where the England rugby team's gone through changes along those sort of lines. Yeah. Hopefully we'll win the Six Nations, but this I think will come out just after, so we'll wait and see.
Well, it's interesting on that point. I mean, I'm a South African, so I find this hard to say, but you look at the best rugby team in the world, right? New Zealand, right? And what does Richie McCaw do when he was captain? He sweeps the change rooms out at the end of the day. You know, I mean, great leader. No one would ever question his leadership on the rugby field, but he's humble enough in the environment of being in the team to be one of the team. And I think that's actually the essence of it. There's a reason that team is so good, that don't have as many registered rugby players as England or South Africa or Australia, and yet they're consistently the best team in the world. And there's a reason, because they know how to get the best out of a team, but with also having clear leadership, clear direction, and the ability to make decisions, you know. So,
definitely. And I think that point, like you say, that not having an ego, being one of the team, being there, like you say, being humble enough to get stuck in when you need to, but being able to, I guess, transition between the decision-making down to sweeping the floors is obviously a key factor for them, and, you know, sounds like it is for you here. Yeah. So I want to bring us apologies. I interrupted. You were telling us the lessons from your startup.
Yes, sorry, me, I'm jumping around.
No, it's, as I said, we would. So please.
Sure. So that was a failure after 12 months, and again, I packed it in, got $5,000 back after a few years. I basically ran out of money. So I had to go cap in hand back to the city, started working at IBM. Spent 4.5 years in IBM. While I was there, I thought, let me go back to basics. I thought I'm not finished with this entrepreneurial thing. So I thought I'd go back to basics. And the fundamentals of business is buy low, sell high. So I thought, well, where can I buy low and where can I sell high? And being from Africa, I thought I can buy low in Africa and sell high in Europe / Western world. And so I thought I'd use the internet to sell African art on the European / Western world stage. So I started this business up. I had my father-in-law helping me down in South Africa source the art, and I was sort of selling it out here on the internet. But that unfortunately that market is very narrow, very small. It got to turning over a little bit of business, but I did this in the side in the evenings. I didn't actually resign, so I couldn't afford to. So I did it on the side. But it was only ever going to be a lifestyle business. It was never going to be something that could really scale because the market just genuinely isn't big enough. At least at that time, it wasn't. And I'm not a person who loved African art per se. I mean, I'd love art, but not in the way that I wanted to make my life, if you know what I mean. So it was never going to be something that would be a passion business either. So I kind of let that one dwindle, at least die on the vine, if you like. Then I went across to Accenture. And while I was in Accenture, I spent a lot of time on aircraft because I was flying out to the States a lot, doing a lot of work out in the US. And that 6-hour flight transatlantic, I tried to use productively. So I've always been interested in technology, and I got my hands on a keyboard and decided to code up a trading system. And I wrote a trading system, put $50,000 of my own money into it, I think, at the time, and traded it up to $500,000. And I was just about to kind of pull the trigger on, let's get third-party money in and let's start really building a hedge fund. When
you say traded up, you were investing your $500,000 in stocks and shares. Sorry, your 50,000 into stocks and shares.
Yes, that's correct. So it was systems trading. So it essentially was algorithmic trading. So
it wasn't that yours was a system a trader would use. Your system helped you trade.
It traded, automatic trading. So in essence, I buy and sell signals that were automatically traded in the marketplace, and it was based on back testing and I mean, if you know much about this, it was a momentum-based system, right?
Okay.
And I did all the back testing, and it looked like it showed 40% returns over the last 20 years, blah, blah, blah. So I started trading my own money with it and got 50,000 to $500,000 in about 9 months or so.
Wow.
And I thought, this looks like a winner. So let me see if I can try raise some third-party money and make this into a business. And literally 2 months later, my $500,000 was down to zero. So, another life's lesson in that. So the lesson out of that for me was, you got to do what you're good at. Yes, I can code. Yes, I can understand the market forces. But actually, when you're trading with technology, you're not thinking market forces. It's technical trading. So it's really trading with price action, which doesn't actually take into account any of the market fundamentals at all. So maybe I should stick to what I was good at. So after spending 5 years in Accenture and having those 3 failures, I suddenly realized I've been with KPMG, IBM, and Accenture now. And great brands, great businesses, and I would never knock those businesses. They are simply stellar businesses. But still, I think they've lost the spirit of consulting, the ethos of advisory type business. And I thought, well, this is something I can recreate. This is something I think I can build. I know this industry really well. I've done it on and off in amongst my other ventures for quite some time. So why don't I build a business that looks and feels like I think consulting should be? Yeah. Hence Q Elixir. So, we're now 9 years in and here we are.
I wanted to kick off with the start of the Q5 journey. I'm always interested in firms with co-founders and the story behind how all the co-founders met, how they got going, who spoke to who decided there'd be 4, not 5, not 3. And I just wanted to find out really how you started Q5.
Go, Ollie. I'll go. You go first.
I'm being permitted to speak. So I think it's a really good question, and actually this question is relevant to any small business, whether it's a consulting firm or whether it's a biscuit manufacturer. We're a human capital business. Whether you're a law firm or accounting firm, when you're experienced, and certainly Sharon and I had been working for probably about 13, 14 years at a time where we thought it would be great to go and take what we do for a living out to market in a new brand, you get an itch, don't you? We got to our mid-30s, and I think there are a couple of things going on. Firstly, the firms that we had been working in up to that point didn't major in organisation design and development. It was always a peripheral thing for them, and yet it was the work we loved and the work we were most passionate about. And we were thinking, well, actually, maybe if we were to create a firm that focused in the organisation space, that we could have great fun creating a brand from scratch and taking it to market and doing the work we're most passionate about. And I certainly, from Sharon and my perspective, we'd known each other a long time. We hadn't actually worked together, but we'd known each other a long time. I think we had a respect for, I certainly respected you. I hope God respected me.
Definitely.
And so
wouldn't be here if I didn't.
So we had long conversations over bottles of wine, and it took about a year of planning, a year of talking through what we wanted to do.
And I think when you begin to think about setting up a business, the only right time to do it is when you are personally ready to found a business. We set up Q5 in 2009, which was in the last recession, and genuinely a number of people who we started to talk to about it, our wives and husbands, our advisors said, why are you doing it now? And for me, it was a really obvious answer. It was like, because I'm ready. I'm ready now personally, because the commitment that you need to give to founding and establishing a business is all consuming. And so you just have to kind of look, deep inside. You have to look at the people that you've chosen to do it with and say, we're ready to go. And actually, whatever else is going on around you doesn't really matter at that stage. You've got to have that belief that you've got the experience, the impact, and the knowledge to do what you need to do.
No, I agree.
And I want to just come back to the point. You two you said you'd known each other a long time. My understanding is you were both at Accenture for a sort of period of time. Was it that you had become friends there, and then I know you both went off and did other things that would be interesting to explore, but how did you two decide that you would come together to have these conversations about a business? So
where it's kind of like unraveling a ball of string. How do you actually track back to the origination of the conversation? And I think in reality it was probably Ollie that actually picked up the phone. I was freelancing at the time. I had 3 small children. I had started to play with some of my own business ideas. Ollie was in a smaller consultancy at the time, doing very well and growing that business. But clearly he had an itch, a personal itch as well, and
personal itch.
Personal itch. You can take that without.
I had a personal itch.
And he picked up the phone and said, Can we have a glass of wine? I've got an idea I want to talk to you about. And then it grew from there. So I'll let you then, so what made you pick up the phone?
So what made me pick up the phone to you at the time was it's like building a pop band. It's like building a band, a manufactured band. Sharon is, well, you can see here, a very charismatic, high energy a driver. And what we did, so your first question was, how did you decide whether to have 4 or 5 or 2 people? Right at the very beginning, we wanted to go into organization design and development, and we wanted to be able to be a ready-made team.
Yes.
So we wanted a team where we had someone that was very arithmetical. We wanted someone that knew finance functions. We wanted someone that knew HR functions, and so we were able to work as a ready-made team on a particular client. So we had different personality types. There were three blokes, two women. So it was always very diverse, actually. And our diversity to this day, we have a lot of people in the business now, and 55% of our firm is made up by women. So it's always been quite a diverse business. And the different personality types to begin with, we had drivers, we had expressives, we went for 5. And it was the right number.
Yes.
But, I mean, Sharon is a force of nature. And I saw someone that I knew would be able to go out, knew no fear, had a good network, and had worked both within a client organisation and as a consultant. So that was really the mélange that we went through.
And so why did I sort of take the call? I'd been freelancing for a couple of years, having left an in-house role. And I was actually a bit lonely and a bit bored actually working on my own. That's not my kind of modus operandi. I'm much better in a team. And having known Ollie from Accenture, so having, at that point known him for 10 years, I knew that it would be a lot of fun and that, we would go places.
I want to come back, actually, Ollie, to your point around the manufactured pop band approach. I like the metaphor. Do you remember what specific questions you asked yourself, or what business model or business plan you were trying to populate to get to those answers? How did you decide you needed one HR person, one finance person, one person who's good with maths, one person who's good with people, let's say?
So it was a really simple thing. If you're going to create a team-led and team-run business, you need people with different attributes. So we didn't want to go for a whole group of homogenous people. We wanted people that brought different skill sets. And we've always had a philosophy right from the first day that you need to soar with your strengths. Now, I know from our experience of having worked in some of the bigger firms before, there was always a sense that in order to be promoted from one level to the next, you had to demonstrate you could do volumetric modeling, and then you needed to be able to build, databases and things. And if you couldn't get that tick in the box, we wouldn't promote you any further. Whereas you've got people with myriad skill sets and attributes. And actually, if you're an extraordinarily brilliant facilitator, why force them to become a demon Excel modeler if they're brilliant at facilitating? So right from the outset, we wanted to demonstrate that you could have a team with different attributes and different skill sets, and they were all equal value. So that's what we went to from the competency point of view.
And was this the two of you? You mentioned we. So you'd had your original drink.
So we talked to quite a few people. In fact, there are certainly one of the people that you've interviewed on another podcast is another person that we spoke to. So this isn't something that we just did overnight. This was this did genuinely take about 12 months worth of working out who we wanted to go into business with. And the other thing, it's worth saying that the other thing that was driving us, and in terms of attracting the right type of personality into the business, was the fact that when you do what we do for a living, by setting up your own business and learning about what it takes to brand it, and learning about what it takes to manage a P&L, and discovering what a day-to-day is, and needing to balance the books. These are things that we advise our clients on a day-to-day basis. If you're in a big four firm, you will often be asked those questions by your clients, yet you've never lived it viscerally. So, going back to the very beginning, we were at a point where we were looking for people who wanted to experience that from scratch. So, it's really key.
I think there comes a point as well where you have to say, this now feels right. So there's a big bit of gut instinct in that as well. So you can do all the planning, and you can spend, a lot of time saying, what's the scenario and what will happen if. But I think eventually, we got to a stage where we had 5 people around the table, and we said, are we going to do this? Are we going to resign from our jobs? Because we were all working apart from Carla, and we're going to now do this. We're going to stop the planning, and we're going to kind of get into action. So there's lots of data and lots of kind of, conversation, but then there's a gut moment that says it feels right.
And I won't labour it too much, but your approach to finding your co-founders, I think, is a really interesting one. And I'm just thinking for others who, like you, maybe sort of when you started, were mid-30s, want to do something similar. Do you remember why it was that you decided that? So Chris and Daryl, forgive me.
Carla,
currently, I believe there's
Carla.
only. So Carla was the
fifth person, yeah.
The fifth Beatle.
The fifth Beatle. So it's interesting. So these questions are really relevant, actually, because Carla lasted for about a year or so.
14 months.
14 months. And she was terrific and brilliant, and actually works with us now 10 years on as an associate of the business. But again, at the time, it was I can't stress enough how brutal it was. We were talking about the beginning of 2009. As Sharon said, the expression you used, the pit of the recession, it was absolutely the pit of the recession. And I think at the time, it was such hard work that we got to our first year. I think as a business, we billed about £20,000 in the first 6 months.
Yeah.
So it was a business where it was all or nothing for certainly 4 of us. And the 5th person happened to be married to a fantastic chap who worked in a bank. And it was kind of, this is all consuming. This is absolutely all consuming. I've got 3 kids to look after. I'm not sure I can give it what you are giving, Sharon, and what you're giving, Chris. So that was, finding the right people. It was who was hungry enough to want to do it, who was slightly mad enough to want to do it, who shared that passion for creating a brand from scratch, and who was prepared to risk everything to do it. And I, again, it's really
I would want to add one other really important characteristic, who was loyal. Loyalty and obviously you learn you learn how loyal people are over time, but I think we knew that was a really strong value in all of the 5 of us, because we had to be committed to this. And it was a big thing for Carla at 14 months to say, I'm not going to do this anymore, but she was loyal to Q5 and to us and didn't kind of want to mess anybody around, and so she made a really hard decision, and I remember it being a hard decision.
Yes, it was a massive decision.
It's good to hear that it's worked out very well for all of you, and she's still working with you now. I'm always interested in the ones that got away, or the ones that you ummed and ahed around, someone who might have been your 6th Beatle, but you ultimately decided no. Do you remember any of the questions that either you asked yourselves that led to that? Was there anyone, firstly, I guess? And if so, do you remember any of the questions that led you to say no, or led you to decide it wasn't quite right?
But it's a really good question. I think it's a really good question. There's a sort of mutuality to it, in the sense that when we were talking to people, the people that weren't founders of Q5, and many of them have gone on to amazing things, it was whether they were prepared to take the degree of risk that, if you leave a well-paid job, and we were all pretty experienced. None of us took severance packages. We all walked away from pretty decent jobs to do this. It was a hell of a punt. And I certainly, speaking about 2 or 3 of the other people that we spoke to at the time, it was, this is almost too much to comprehend. I think we're better off doing this option here because it de-risks it. It's already set up, for instance, and I can go and set up a new industry sector, for instance, or this thing here, they've been going for 5 years already. I think we can probably go. So it was a sort of like, it was a mutual and a very good, upbeat, uplifting experience going through that. But the people who ended up within the business, I've got to say, one of the other difficulties, I think, when you set up a business is going into business with mates, with friends. Yes. And I mean, Sharon and I have known each other since 1995, but we were professional acquaintances. And actually, if it had all gone pear-shaped and we couldn't stand the sight of each other after the first year, it wouldn't have been
it doesn't
the
reach
end of the
into
world.
The rest
it wouldn't
of your
have
life.
reached into the, it wouldn't have destroyed our families. There is one of the 5. I mean, the Darryl, who you've mentioned already. I've known him since I was 18. So that was a hell of a big gamble to go into business with a very, very good friend that you've known almost since childhood. It's not something that you would ordinarily recommend other people to do, but it has worked out.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.